Hello, my name is Bill Seagrave. I'm with SBV Solutions, and I'm here today speaking with my good friend Dominique Lahaix, who is CEO of eCairn, a company with an exciting new technology related to market segment profiling. It's very different. Dominique, tell us what this is about. What is the focus of eCairn?
So, good morning first. And so what we do is we map the social web and we make it available for brands. So what we mean by that is that we realize that there is an underlying structure behind, all this conversation and all these people that have stepped up and wrote content, and people network one to each other, connect one to each other, and this structure is critical to understand when you want to do marketing, whether for research or influencer identification. So that's what we do.
So this sounds very different from the approach that the first generation technologies that do monitoring, keyword searching, those types of brand name recognition within the market. It sounds very different. How is that? Can you give me an analogy that expresses that?
Yeah, the main difference is that when you look at the first generation solution, they take all the conversation, from all the different outlets, but they don't really get to who is behind and who are the group of people who are behind the conversation. So let's say you are in a fashion brand. You can get all the conversation on on your brand, but still this conversation may come from people that will never be in market for your products, or they could come from fashion tribes, the way we call them. And you can just equate, one conversation from somebody who is not in the market and a conversation from a magazine like Vogue or a key influencer in this community. The same is that you may have several conversations from the same person. So some persons tend to be very vocal. Some will just say one time your brand name. But when you put it in a mix, if you want to get real good intelligence about it, you have to figure out who is behind, what kind of influence they have, how frequently they talk. That's the kind of thing that we reveal to brands.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of things. So it's the recognition and development of the community, or the tribe as you called it, that changes the representation of a person's influence or a person's image within that market segment. All right, so I brought a chart here. Not to cause a little trouble, but I think it's a very important construct to get through here. So this is a chart of the music community within, actually it crosses a couple of countries.
Yes.
Can you explain what we're looking at and how these different tribes are actually expressed, structurally?
Yeah, so on this chart, each single node is a person, and each line between the different nodes is the use of content. So it can be a blog link, so somebody writes a piece of content and reference your content. It can be a retweet, it can be a reply, a mentions, and this is the natural organization of the music community. So what we went to build this, so we went and scanned all the music community using algorithm that makes topology, linguistics, and the graph naturally clusters around different genres like jazz, hip-hop, rock, electronic, soul, and you've got the same kind of graph in all different type of verticals. So you take the mom community.
Okay. So the clustering of these sources, and the sources can be any social site that expresses some type of conversation, blog posts, tweets, Facebook pages, those types of things.
Yep.
And the clustering of the sources is related to the relationship between those sources. In other words, how they share the content, how they work with each other, which is very different from the first generation products in that they would just see conversations.
Yeah,
they wouldn't see the impact. In other words, Bill Seagrave in the hip hop, which is hard to imagine, but Bill Seagrave in the hip hop tribe might be very different than Bill Seagrave in the jazz, Bill Seagrave in the rock, Bill Seagrave somewhere else. So when I hear you give an analogy of that cake that's made in France with all the different layers and then it's compressed down, it's the compression that the prior first generation products see. They don't see the different layers of the market segment profile.
Yeah, so
your product actually pulls that out because it looks at the interest graph relationships.
Yeah, they see the web as a one level, type of structure.
Yeah, all right, that's very exciting. Now, within that structure. So here, this would be maybe, I can't see, but this would be a tribe specific. So a couple of sources, and now you see the intense relationship. Can you explain what those lines are?
So again, these lines shows who is using each other content, and this is what drives influence. So, and when you mix this kind of graph for, deep content production, like blog, videos on one end, and Twitter, as an example, on the other end, you get a very fine analysis of how influence is taking place. So, just take an example. So I could be a writer on bluegrass, okay, and write articles, but I may never tweet, okay. And you on the other end, you may be somebody hyper connected in Twitter. So when you use my content and you distribute it out, so you're influential, I'm influential, but these are two very different categories.
We're influential in different areas.
Yeah,
I like that.
That's what we call Maven and connectors. It has been called Maven and connector in the industry. So that's how we represent influence. So we score influencer on each and every category, and we have 700 of these already. But we also score the influencers based on the type of influence that they have. So the deep content writers, the Maven, and the deep Twitter users, the connectors.
I see. So influence is not just an expression of reach, which is sort of what happens now. You have someone who tweets a lot or posts a lot without representation of how that information is used beyond their post or their tweet. That would be first generation. Second generation is who's using that, what are they doing with it? So it's an expression of first the relationship between the giver of the content and the receiver, and then the intensity of that relationship based on what that receiver then does. So I think it's a very exciting amount of profiling. In fact, my understanding at this point is that certainly tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of data points that you've gone through, or that eCairn has gone through, to come up with this structural representation of the web. And now for marketing to be able to use that structure, how do they use that? What's...
Yeah, so there are 4 typical use cases. The first is research. So what we really see is that with the third generation product, you only get to the surface of what's happening on the web. But I'm going to continue with my example of a fashion brand. If you are a high-end fashion brand, the structure of the fashion community is rather complex. So you've got a plus size is a sub-community. You've got vintage fashion, which is another community. You've got frugal fashion, which is a third one. So as a fashion brand, you may want to talk differently to all these different constituents, and so you want to research it differently. So you get different type of insights on where you look at, and this you really have a hard time getting it with just keywords and a new flat view of the web. The second obvious use case for us is influencer outreach. So influencer identification and outreach. So we have much deeper way of and much more relevant way of finding who is influential for which kind of domain, which kind of tribes, who they are connected to, and also whether they tend to be more a Maven type of influencer or a connector type of influencer. So the third use case is market segmentation. So some people tend to align their marketing strategy to how the web is naturally organized. Let's say fitness. So fitness is a community. So it's no longer about the demographic. You've got young women in fitness. You've got men in fitness. You've got very older people in fitness. So that could be seen as one segment, which was nowhere that you could do it before the social web and before this uncovering on the tribe. And the last and fourth, really interesting way to use the kind of data that we produce is in content strategy, because when you understand, what the tribes are, who is driving the chatter in this tribe, then you can start to write on topic for what they want to talk about and to be talked about, and also you can use references and network your content a little bit better.
Nice. So what I think is interesting here is that after, as I said before, after these tens of millions of evaluations you've done for structuring the web based on interest graph and relationships and intensity of those relationships, eCairn actually has now the world's, I believe this, I think it's the world's largest interest graph-based market profiling in existence.
Yeah.
That marketing can just tap into and start to develop, as you said, research, outreach campaigns, and so forth. I think it's also very interesting that as I spent yesterday watching some of your presentations to CMOs and so forth, and every company that came in and asked to look at what eCairn would show as an influencer list for a given market segment, brand, type aspect, your list always surprised them. It had a few people that they were very common to and understood, but then it had people that they were, wow, I never thought about that. And then it's so obvious that that particular writer, blogger, individual, would be important in my market space, and yet we've been ignoring it. So I think that you have the ability to just immediately uncover, a very different, well, using the word profile, but a very different perspective of a brand's market, segment, from many different perspectives. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think that this comes from the fair balance that we use between analyzing the topological, side of the web and the content side of the web.
Yeah.
So
this is your expression here with this kind of profiling, with this kind of depth of information. I've heard the term extreme social intelligence being brought forth by both yourself, your team, and certainly the folks that you present to from the brand side, that they are seeing this as a very different type of intelligence that's coming in and really shaking up how they create campaigns, how they segment their markets differently, how they approach going after that influencer base, and it's not just about, as I said, reach. It's not just about the volume somebody has, but it's actually about the impact of that individual's conversation out into the world and who actually listens to it and uses it. I mean, that's very exciting. That's very different, and I'm really looking forward to seeing eCairn grow and prosper and just really make a change up to this world of marketing that we have. So, thank you.
Thank you.